looking at what was due in Algebra 3. If we go to the grade screen. All right, so September 11th, we had due the quiz along with lessons 5 and 6. 1.05, writing the equation of a line. 1.06, comparing functions. And we're generally comparing slopes and y-intercepts for the most part. So as you can see, those two are red for me. I turned them in late, but they're turned in. Still get full credit if they're turned in late. So this week, what do we have this week? We have the Module 1 practice test along with the test. Our test will have two parts most of the time. The first part is all multiple choice. The second part is you have to fill in some work. So let's look at all three of these while we're here. So the practice test, let me go to the practice test right here. All right, the practice test, by the way, I have a video that is in Google Classroom where I have taken this practice test and I work every problem and I explain how I solve each and every problem. So if you take the practice test and there's some that you're missing and you don't understand what you did wrong, go look at my practice video. Say, I need to go look at problem number 10, see how Mr. Brock did that. Now, your problem number 10 may not be exactly the same as my problem number 10, but it will work the same. It like on number 1, given the equation, and here's this, which order of operations solves for x? You may have a different equation here. It'll be the same question, but you might have a different equation. So if your number 10 is different, what is my number 10? Which function below the inverse? Mine will also be an inverse problem. It may be the exact same problem you have. It may not. But I will work my problem and explain how I got the inverse. So the explanation should work on your problem as well, even if you have a different problem. So I encourage you, work this. If you have a printer, print this. It's got the little print button right up there, so you can print this. And if you want to work it on paper, sometimes it's easier to work this on paper. If you don't want to print it, have some paper in front of you and write down these things that you're trying to work the problems on paper, because math is just easier on paper. But do the practice test. And if you take the practice test and you only get like 35% of the problems right, don't take the test. You're obviously not ready to take the test if you do poorly on the practice test. Go back and look at the practice test, see what you missed. This tells you which lessons from. This one's from lesson 101. This one's from 101. As you go down, it'll tell you, what lesson was. This is lesson 105, 104. Go back and look at what you missed. See if you understand why you missed it. You may need to go back to that lesson and look at that again. Oh, that's what I forgot. Or maybe you need to get with me and come to class Wednesday, or I need to change that. It should be an A day this week. Come to class Wednesday or Friday and say, Mr. Brock, I'm taking the practice test and I don't know why I can't get number 13 right. And we can go over that together. I want you to understand before you take the test. I want you to understand the material. I want you to do well in the practice. If you do well in the practice test, then that means you're ready to take the test. Right? So the practice test, you can take it over and over and over. It's just a practice grade. It does not count for anything. So, you can take, this is just to help you on the test. If you can do well in the practice test, you should be able to do well in the test. So that's what the practice test is there for. It's so that you can do well in the test. And so that's just giving you a chance before it counts. So let's look at the test itself. So this just tells you, this is the directions for it, saying complete part 1, complete part 2. It says each part will take about 40 minutes to complete. If you're working all the problems, it may take 40 minutes for each part. So, all right, let's look at part 1. Here's part 1 of the actual test. Multiple choice. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 problems. See, the practice test had a lot more than 10 problems because it wants to give you extra practice. But the test itself only has 10 problems. that are multiple choice. Like this last one says Jack and Jill had 5 pails of water. Each trip up the hill, Jack and Jill obtained 2 more. So which of the graph's that they start with 5 and add 2 more each time. So that ought to be easy enough to look at with slope and y-intercept, right? Wendy's logging the number of video game levels she wins an hour. Here's the function, f of x equals 6x plus 9, where x is the hours and f of x is the number of video games. Which of the following describes the restrictions to domain and range? So the domain, all of them say the domain has to be non-negative, right? Because you can't have a negative number of levels 1. So all of those are the same, but the difference is the range. Are the ranges all greater than -1.5? Or they're all less than -1.5? Are they greater or equal to 9 or less than or equal to 9? So you got to look at that equation and figure out the range of it. You may need to graph that equation. If you graph it, it might be easier to tell what is the range when the x is all non-negative values. What is the equation in slope-intercept form of the line that passes through here and has a slope of -6? Right, so you need to write that in point-slope form because that's what you have. You have a point and you have a slope. So write that in point-slope form and then do some algebra to make it y equals.
Okay. Yeah.
Do some algebra. Get rid of the parentheses. Solve it until you have a y equals, and that will be the same equation right there. What's the equation of a vertical line passing through this point? Is it an x equal or y equals? Which one do you need? What's the equation in point slope of a line passing through here? You have 2 points to choose from. You just don't have the slope. So you have to use the slope equation to figure out what is the slope between those 2 points. And then which one of these uses the point slope form correctly. So it looks like the slope's either going to be 3 or -3. See, that's the only choices we have, 3 or -3. Which one of those is the slope between those 2 points? And then which one of these is the proper equation? Find the average rate of change between x equals 1 and x equals 2. X equals 1 here, x equals 2 here. What is the average rate of change between those points? There's your multiple choice. So anyway, you have 10 problems. And then let's look at part 2. That's part 1 of the test. Here's part 2. Part 2. This one, look, big box to type in. There's only 2 questions. 2 questions. Navia has created the function f of x equals 2x plus 4 over 3. And like I say, yours may be a different problem. But it'll be the same type of problem. To represent the growth of her hair, where x represents the number of months since her last haircut. There's the x. Navia discovers that using the inverse function to solve for x equals 8, using the inverse function, she can predict when her hair will have grown 8 inches. So explain how to accomplish this using complete sentence. So you've got to explain how to take this function and find its inverse function, and then what to do with the x equals 8. So that's what you've got to put here, right? And then here, use the 4 functions for this question. Compare and contrast these 4 functions. Compare their slope and y-intercept first, and then anything else you want to compare. But make sure you've got the slope and y-intercept comparative these. You'll tell what the slope is for f of x, for g of x, for h of x, and for j of x. What is all 4 of the slopes? And then what is the y-intercept for f of x, g of x, h of x, and j of x? You're going to compare those. You may say this one's bigger than those 3, or maybe these 2 are the same, or whatever the comparative is. But make sure you give the slope and y-intercept for all 4 of those functions. And that would go right there. So there's only 2 questions on the part 2. But it said it could take you 40 minutes to do it because you've got to work through and make sure you get all of that right. You don't want to just throw something out there real quick because it's probably worth, I haven't looked at it. I think it's usually like 60-40 split, 60 for the multiple choice and 40 points for those 2 problems. Could be different. I haven't checked on that. But that's what we have this week. We're going to finish module 1, practice test, part 1, part 2. If you haven't finished all the other assignments, do those first. All right. Don't go take the test before you finish the other stuff. And use that practice test. Use that practice test to make sure that you understand the material. If you can't do well on the practice test, don't think, well, I'll do better on the test. No, go back and look at the practice test. See what you missed. Figure out why you missed it. Go back to the lessons. Go back to the videos I made for those. And again, I've got a video of me taking the practice test. So you can use that to go and also check yourself after you do the practice test. Oh, why am I missing that? I can't figure out why that's wrong. Let me see how Mr. Brock did that on the practice test. And that may tell you what your mistake was. And of course, if all else fails, see me, email me, say, hey, we need to get together. You know, if it's not during class time, if we need to get together at a different time during a different period, we have some flexibility to do that later in the week too. So I want you to understand and use that practice test for your advantage. That is your tool right there. And that tells you if you're ready for the module 1 test. You only get one shot on the test. I do allow retakes, but to do a retake, you're going to have to go back and do some more work first to show me that you know better, that you're not just going to guess a second time, right? So you want to do well the first time and move on. So, all right. No need to keep you, not presenting any new lesson, just letting you know what this week holds. And, if you do have questions, hang around, but otherwise I will let you go and tackle your week. We will see you next time.
Let's get out of here. Word to your multiples.